This morning comes from the 5th chapter of Mark, the first 20 verses. Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when they come out of the boat, immediately they met him out of the tombs, a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me. For he said to him, Come out of this man's unclean spirit. And then he asked, What is your name? And he answered, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he begged them earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains, and all the demons begged him, saying, Send us to the swine, that we may enter them. And at once Jesus gave them permission, and the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. They were about 2,000, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. Now those who fed the swine fled, and they were told in the city and in the country, and they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid, and those who saw it told them how it happened to him who had been demon-possessed, and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And when he got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, Go home to your friends, and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he had compassion on you. And he departed, and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done, and all marveled. The author, John Killinger, tells a powerful story about a man who, all alone in a hotel room in Canada, the man is in a state of deep depression. He's the chairman of a large shipping company, but at this moment he is absolutely overwhelmed by the pressures and demands of life. And he lies there on a hotel bed, wallowing in self-pity. All his life, he has worried about everything, always stewing over each and every little detail. And now at midlife, his anxiety had gotten the best of him. On this day, he hit bottom. Paralyzed by his emotional despair, he moans out loud, Life isn't worth living like this. I wish I were dead. And he continues to speak. God, it's a joke, isn't it? Life is nothing but a joke. Suddenly it occurs to the man that this is the first time he's talked to God since he was a little boy. He's silent for a moment, then he begins to pray. The man described it like this. He said, I just talked out loud about what a mess my life was in, how tired I was, and how much I wanted things to be different in my life. And you know what happened next? I could have sworn I heard a voice that said, it doesn't have to be that way. I laughed at myself. I must be hearing things. But then I was certain I heard those words. It doesn't have to be that way. He went home. He talked about what happened to his wife. He went to his brother, who was a minister, and he asked him, do you think it was God speaking to me? And the brother said, yes, I do. Because that is the message of God to not only you, but to each and every person. That is the message of the Bible. That's why Jesus Christ came into this world, to save us, to free us, to change us, to show us that it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to be depressed or selfish or hopeless. Jesus Christ can turn your life around. If you welcome him into your life, into your heart, he will make you a new person. A few days later, the man called his brother back. He said, you were right. It has really happened. I've done it. I'm a new man. Christ has turned it around for me. Well, the man is still prone to anxiety. He still has to work hard. He still has all the pressures of his job and all the pressures of life. But now he has a source of strength. During the week, he often leaves his work desk and goes to a church near the office. And he sits there and he prays. He says it clears my head. It reminds me of who I am. It reminds me of whose I am. And every time I sit there in the sanctuary, I think back to that day in that hotel room in Canada and how depressed and lonely I was. And I hear that voice saying, it doesn't have to be that way. That's precisely what the story in the 5th chapter of Mark is all about. Christ walks into the tormented life of the Gerasene demonic, this madman whose life is coming apart at the seams, and he turns it around for him. He gives him a new beginning, a new start, a new birth. Now, at the beginning of the narrative, it sounds like a horror story. This wild-eyed madman comes running and shrieking out of the tomb. He's so unbalanced that he's convinced that he's being held captive by a whole legion of demons who are pulling and jerking and pulling him in all different directions. This is a eerie and frightening situation. Now, when we read in the 4th chapter, Jesus and the disciples had just come through a storm on the Sea of Galilee. It's nighttime, and they just survived this frightening storm, and they must be thrilled to set foot on solid ground. But as soon as they get out of the boat, they encounter a different kind of storm, another scary experience. They hear the strange sounds coming out of the tombs, shrieks, growls, screams, the rattling of chains, and suddenly a horrifying sight. A madman with tattered clothes, bruised, dirty, bloody, with pieces of the chain dangling from his arms and his ankles, comes running and screaming towards them. What would you have done in this situation? I'm pretty sure I know what I would have done. I would have jumped back in the boat. But not Jesus. Jesus just stood his ground and faced the madman. Undaunted, unafraid. Jesus stood there and dealt with this wild man. Jesus healed him. He brought peace to his troubled soul. He changed him. He cleansed him. He turned his life around. And you know he can do that for you. He can do that for me. Now please notice something here. The madman said his name was Legion. Now that's a military word. And so appropriate in this case because this man was at war. He was doing battle with everybody. He was at war with himself. He was at war with other people. He was at war with God. Then Jesus walked into his life and in essence said to him, it doesn't have to be that way. Is that a message that we need to hear today? I mean, do you sometimes feel you're being pushed and pulled and jerked in many different directions? Do you sometimes feel that life is a war and it just leaves you feeling worn and tired and rejected? If so, Jesus Christ has a word for you today. If you listen real closely, you can hear Jesus saying, it just doesn't have to be that way. Now let me underscore this by lifting up three ideals out of this great story from the 5th chapter of Mark. First of all, you don't have to be at war with yourself. It just doesn't have to be that way. Now we notice here in Mark 5 that the Gerasene demonic, this madman, was at war with himself. He was hurting himself, bruising himself, injuring himself. How often we do that? You know, as Pogel once put it, we have met the enemy, and he is us. One day, a young father was shopping in a large, crowded supermarket. His 3-year-old son was with him. The little boy was riding in the grocery cart, and he was misbehaving terribly, causing all kinds of problems. When Dad would put something in the cart, the little boy just toss it back out. If he got too close to a shelf, the boy would try to rake stuff off the shelf. At one point, the little boy crawled out of the cart and ran down the aisle, knocking over one display. Father was in hot pursuit, and the people who were in the store at the time could hear the father saying out loud over and over again, "Just be patient, Tommy. It won't be much longer, Tommy. It'll be okay, Tommy. Hang in there, Tommy." Finally, a distinguished-looking woman came up to the man and said, "I want to compliment you. I've been watching you, and I want you to know I admire you and the remarkable patience you have with little Tommy." "Oh, but lady," he said, you misunderstand. His name is Michael. I'm Tommy." Oh, that's a smart man. He was right to start with himself. If we're going to set a problem right, we have to get ourselves right first. Some time ago, a young lawyer came to see his pastor. He was down in the dumps, and he said, "Everything's gone wrong. I have lost confidence in my professional ability. My wife has left me. I can't get along with my children. I'm cut off from my parents. I'm cut off from my in-laws. I'm having conflicts with my coworkers. I'm drinking very heavily. Everybody has left me, and actually I don't blame them. I've been bitter. I've been hostile. I've done so many mean and cruel things, and now I have so many problems." He paused, took a deep breath, and then leaned forward and said, "To tell you the truth, I think all those problems and troubles are just symptoms. My real problem is I just don't like myself. and that taints everything I do and everything I touch. Well, he was probably right. When you're at war with yourself, it smudges and distorts every relationship. On the other hand, when we feel good about ourselves, we are more loving, more patient, more thoughtful, more gracious towards everyone we see. If you want to feel good about yourself, if you want to like yourself more, if you want to be at peace with yourself, remember this: you are special to God. God loves you. You are extremely valuable to God. God claims you as a child. If you ever doubt or wonder about that, recall the story about the old man who was brought into the hospital emergency room late one evening, the apparent mugging victim. He looked like one of the homeless. He was ill-clothed, dirty, battered, appeared to be unconscious. One of the young medical students took one look at him and said, "What in the world should we do with this worthless wretch?" The old man opened his eyes slightly and in an amazingly strong voice said, "Call him not worthless, for whom Christ died." You don't have to be at war with yourself. It just doesn't have to be that way. You are special to God, and that makes you extremely valuable. And second, you don't have to be at war with other people. It doesn't have to be that way. In Mark 5, Legion, the madman, was very much at war with other people. He had been cast out of society, chained, shackled, exiled to the tombs, constantly doing battle with other people. And here in this story, he runs out towards Jesus and his disciples, looking for a fight. Isn't it amazing how crossways and hostile people can get? I remember some time ago watching a 2020 program. It was called Neighbors at War, and they were showing how next door neighbors do battle with one another. You know, fighting one another, fussing at one another, suing one another, sometimes even shooting at one another, all because of a barking dog or a noisy power tool or a bouncing basketball. When are we going to ever learn? When will we ever learn to befriend one another, to respect one another, to love one another? A Dear Abby column told about a young man named Bill from a wealthy family who was about to graduate from high school. Now, it was the custom in this very affluent neighborhood for the parents to give the graduate an automobile. Bill and his father had spent weeks looking at cars, and the week before graduation it seemed that they found the perfect car. And Bill was certain that on graduation night that car was going to be his. After the graduation ceremonies, Bill's father handed him a gift-wrapped Bible. Bill was so furious that he threw the Bible down and stormed out of the house. He and his father never spoke again, never saw each other again. His parents tried continuously to reach him, but Bill refused to speak to them or to see them, to answer the telephone, or read their letters. When his parents died, Bill came home, and as he sat one night going through his father's possessions that he was to inherit, he came across the Bible that his father had given him for graduation. Bill brushed away the dust, opened it to find a cashier's check, dated the day of his graduation, and the exact amount of the car that the two of them had chosen together. Isn't that sad? Tragic. I hope Bill read that Bible from cover to cover because it has so many lessons that he needed to learn, that all of us need to learn. One of them being, you don't have to be at war with each other. It just doesn't have to be that way. And third, you don't have to be at war with God. In Mark 5, Legion the madman had also cut himself off from God. What have you to do with me? Don't torment me, he said to Jesus. Carl Mickelson, he was a brilliant young theologian. He died in a plane crash just a few years ago. He once told about playing with his young son one afternoon. They were tussling playfully in the front yard when Dr. Mickelson actually hit the young boy square in the face with his shoulder, with his elbow. It was a pretty sharp blow. The little boy was stunned by the impact of the elbow. It hurt. He was just about to burst into tears, but then he looked up into his father's eyes. And instead of anger and hostility, he saw there his father's sympathy and his father's concern. He saw there his father's love and his father's compassion. Instead of exploding into tears, the little boy suddenly burst into laughter. What he saw in the father's eyes made all the difference. That is just one of the reasons that Jesus is so important to us. He lets us see into the Father's eyes. When we look at Jesus, we see what God is like. When we look at Jesus, we see what God wants us to be like. Jesus shows us the love, the compassion, the concern, and the empathy in God's eyes. And that's the good news of our faith. Jesus reveals to us that God looks at us not with angry, vengeful, condemning eyes, but with the eyes of love. So we don't have to be at war with ourselves. We don't have to be at war with other people. We don't have to be at war with God. Jesus comes into our lives just as he came into Legion's life, telling us it just doesn't have to be that way. Dear God, may we never forget the depth of your love for us. Amen.